This is the second episode of the podcast series focusing on electric vehicle market in Cambodia. The electric vehicle market has experienced significant growth in recent years, with a rapid increase in the deployment of EV charging stations. This growth signals opportunities for developing EV infrastructure, particularly in regions like Cambodia. Cambodia offers favorable conditions for EV charging infrastructure development. The country has a young population indicating potential for increased adoption of new technologies such as electric vehicles. Additionally, Cambodia is highly motorized, showing strong demand for infrastructure to support electric vehicles. Furthermore, Cambodia has economic growth that can contribute to the increased investment in EV infrastructure. The high price of fossil fuel in the region also encourages the transition to electric vehicle, making the development of charging station as a lucrative prospect. Per the trend, the majority of Cambodia's electricity to come will be from renewable energy resources. This not only aligns with global trend towards sustainable energy, but also ensures the use of electric vehicle in Cambodia contributes to lower emission and environmental conservation. Considering these factors, the prospect of EV growth infrastructure, particularly charging station in Cambodia, appears promising. As the country continues to embark on sustainable technology, the demand for robust EV charging station is likely to increase, presenting significant prospects for investments and development in the sector. However, we should also consider the general safety, accessibility, and affordability of the infrastructure. Additionally, incentives that will attract investment in the charging station business across the country. In this episode, we will discuss the regulatory landscape around charging station businesses, tax incentives, if any, and the market condition. So let us jump right into it and discuss with our panelists. Come along. Hi everyone. Hi, how are you, Andy? Hi, Cécile, how are you?
Very fine, thank you.
Welcome back. In the previous episode, we discussed at length regarding the assembly units and spare part manufacturing investments in Cambodia. We discussed the legal aspects of it. We discussed the tax incentives or the tax requirements. We discussed the market insight by two experts in the field. In the present episode, we're going a step ahead. We're talking about the critical infrastructure which will support EV business in Cambodia, and that is charging stations. However, before I jump into nitty-gritties and details of charging stations as an investment in Cambodian market, there's one aspect which I believe is very important for our listeners to understand, and that works equally well for almost all of the 4 episodes which we'll be discussing different aspects of EV business in the country, and that is the repatriation of profit. The investments which are brought into the country, how easy or difficult they are to be repatriated. Now with that, I will call upon Vatna. And Vatna, please give us some insight about the processes, the legal requirements regarding repatriation of profits, or as they call dividends, from Cambodian entity to the parent entity. And following that, Diber, without me having to ask you the question on it, if you could talk about a bit of tax aspects in it. Over to you, Vatna.
Okay, thank you again, Nishant. The answer to your question will be it is not difficult for the investor to take back their profit to their country or to be paid the dividend. So, as a general rule, the law on commercial enterprise stipulate the shareholder right to receive the dividend, and who have the authority to declare the dividend. It is the director. So, it is the director role and duty to ensure that the declaration of dividend is in accordance with the accounting principle and the term of the payment according to the class of the share as addressed in the article of association of the company. One of the key points to consider when the director declares the dividend is that the director must ensure that any payment of the dividend will not affect the company status to be able to pay its liability as they become due. That
So
is
solvency test.
that is
basically.
correct. Yes.
Okay.
And then the realization value of the company asset would not be less than its liability after they pay the dividend. So this is the two important key rule. And other than that, there is no specific government approval to be applied for in order for the director to declare the dividend or for the shareholder to be paid the dividend in Cambodia.
And this applies equally for a QIP company vis-a-vis non-QIP company.
It's applied to all type of company, including the QIP company and any company that invests in any sector in Cambodia. So there's only one declaration of dividend rule in Cambodia.
That's very interesting to know, because in many locations around the region, for you to be in order to repatriate profits, particularly for those investments which require or which have been granted investment permits, that is, tax benefits, etc., they may have to go back to the regulators to get approval to repatriate the profit. And that's a very, very interesting point to note. And I'm sure this would be interesting for many investors looking into the country, is the ease of repatriating the profits. Yeah. Diber, over to you about the tax angles attached to repatriation of dividends.
Okay, so Cambodia does not have, Cambodia has withholding tax applicable on dividend payments. So the withholding tax rate in Cambodia, it's 14%. But if the recipient of the dividend is a member or in a country where a double tax agreement with Cambodia exists, then the rate can be reduced up to 10% in general. Now, in Cambodia, there's also a concept of a deemed dividend distribution for tax, where it applies in case where the company sold or transfer the shareholding in a company, where the authorities would consider any retained earnings earned in that company with respect to the percentage of the shareholding of the selling investor would be considered as a deemed dividend subject to 14%. Now, it's quite critical at this stage because Cambodia also will introduce a separate capital gains tax regime, and with the introduction of a capital gains tax regime by January 2025, the withholding tax, it is unclear at this stage whether they will remove the deemed dividend distribution for withholding tax. So we will have to look at subsequent issuances from the GDT, General Department of Taxation, whether withholding tax on deemed dividend distribution will still apply starting January 2025.
I appreciate that, but there's an angle here. Deemed dividend is on the dividend, which is notional in the present case, right? And as far as CGT, that is capital gains, that would be on something which is very particularly ascertainable, which will be the gains from the sale.
Yes.
Right. And so I believe that's something which you, as rightly pointed out, something we really need to look forward to as to how the regulators frame this.
Correct. Yes.
But going by our understanding within the regions where DFDL operates, Do you see these both systems prevailing at the same time, or it's one or the other?
It should be one. From our understanding, it should be one or the other, because both withholding tax and capital gains tax are a form or a type of income tax. So you can only apply one type of tax. So currently, Cambodia does not have any capital gains tax. That's why they tax a deemed dividend distribution. So
Understood.
once the capital gains tax is implemented, then let's see how the government would react or consider the application.
Certainly, and that's something to look out for. But that's only when we are looking at selling the business
Correct. Yes.
and not really at the dividend stage,
Correct.
which is a very simplified process, and particularly for entities which are looking at a medium term to a long term horizon in the country. I believe this is a very, very lucrative, or rather, very, very interesting aspect to know, because there is an ease of how you can get the investments back from a dividend angle. With that, I will move into the topic of the second podcast and episode, and that is charging stations, right? A critical component. Importantly, there are many aspects to be looked into when we're talking about charging stations in the country. From an investor's perspective, it is about what are the benefits, what are the regulatory framework in place. From an investor's perspective, it is about tax benefits and incentives around it. From a consumer's perspective, where Cécile will also touch upon certain aspects, is how convenient or how easily accessible this infrastructure would be, because this directly plays into the demand of EV when people are going to buy that. So with that, I'm going to open this session on charging stations, and by way of a repetition, Simon, I'm calling upon you again.
Thank you very much.
So my question to you would be, Simon, as to what are the specific regulations governing the installation and operation of EV charging stations in Cambodia? And the second aspect of the question would be, are there any permits or licenses required to set up an EV charging station in China?
Without wishing to start the first question of this episode of the series on a negative note, we have to be, pragmatic. The installation and operation of EV charging stations in Cambodia isn't specifically regulated at the moment. Now, this lack of specific regulations, particularly in a developing country, in a relatively young country like Cambodia, it's a hindrance for investors coming in, but it's also an opportunity for legislators to draft law specifically tailored to this new technology. And so I don't think it is negative. I think it creates amazing opportunities. There's a perceived barrier that there's a lack of regulatory clarity, there's a cumbersome licensing procedure. The legal framework for selling electricity isn't particularly clear, but then we have to understand that it wasn't drafted with EV charging stations in mind. And the government is aware of this, and there is hope. The Ministry of Public Works and Transportation, as I believe Vatana mentioned earlier, they came out this year or last year, was it 2023, with their roadmap for the development of an electric vehicle charging station network in Cambodia. And these aren't my words. The regulatory gaps aren't my words. They've been identified specifically by the MPWT. And hopefully they provide recommendations for how we can progress as a country to move forward. Some of these recommendations develop an authorization process for high power charging infrastructure, Safety standards, as I believe Vatana spoke to earlier, defining the regulatory approach and the safety standards that need to be applied when you're charging your electric vehicles at home. These are all concerns, and they've all been identified by the MPWT. So that in itself has to be a positive move. Licensing procedures remain a hurdle, Nishant. Obtaining licenses from the EAC, the Electricity Authority of Cambodia, and the EDC, the licensing, Nishant, procedures remain a hurdle. Obtaining licenses from the Electricity Authority of Cambodia, I think that it's fair to say remains a cumbersome process. And as I mentioned earlier, there is no specific licensing procedure for EV charging stations at the moment.
Okay.
Selling electricity, the framework currently for selling electricity remains a challenge. This is identified by the MPWT in its report, in its roadmap. It doesn't specifically address the unique nature of EV charging stations. And this, at the moment, leads to compliance issues. It may inhibit investment in the sector. And so we have this kind of lack of clarity between the EAC and the EDC. How are they going to deal with this? Obviously, the government, I think we spoke about that in the last episode, the government is keen for investment in the vehicle assembly and manufacturing sector, but there needs to be an infrastructure, Nishant. There needs to be an infrastructure for charging. If e-vehicles are going to form a part of this economy, a part of this new movement, there needs to be an infrastructure. These have been identified by the government. Recommendations have been put out there by the government, and so let's hope these are implemented.
Certainly, and I'm a firm believer that a lack of a legal regime is not so much of a bad thing than having a legal regime which is more protectionist, more badly drafted, which rather inhibits the investors. In a present context where there is a lack of investment, it is actually an opportunity, as you rightly coined, for the investors to work with the regulators hand in hand and bring about that change, bring about those international standards which will attract investments into the charging station business in the country. And that's a good takeaway, that I agree there are lack of relevant or lack of sector specific regulations to factor the investments. Importantly, I believe from a macro regulatory perspective, things will follow sooner. But eventually, they will have to go down to the municipal level as well, particularly factoring things like locations. Where can you really place a charging station? Or at what frequency will a charging station have to be? Can you have them in a homestead space or in a shared accommodation area? Can that be in a shopping mall or government premise, or for that matter, school or universities? So this is something which has to be looked into a bit more closely, and I believe regulators are looking into it, with the national policy being the first milestone, and many would follow after that. With that, Vatna, I again would call upon you to discuss something which is, the form of a company. Basically, are there any foreign ownership restrictions in the sector? Say foreigners are allowed, but with only percentage for locals, etc. And what are the common types of investment vehicles, for investing into EV charging stations? And the last would be, what would be the best jurisdiction for investment into this business? I understand we have touched upon this in our previous episode, but again, there could be some angle which may be different from one sector to one aspect to another. And Simon did touch upon several jurisdictions, but I'm clubbing it all together and and placing it in front of you to probably answer us.
Thank you, Nishant. Similar to what we discussed in the previous podcast, there is no foreign ownership restriction in investing into the charging station in Cambodia. So a company that investing in the charging station business can be 100% owned by a foreigner. This is a good news for investors. In terms of the common type of vehicle, in terms of investment or the recommended type, it should be the limited liability company, the LLC. Once again, it because of the limitation of the liability of the company and its ability to sue or to be sued under its own name. That is the common type of investment vehicle for the charging station. And I understand that there are investors coming in. They are in the process of establishing their company right now in the form of limited liability company to invest in the charging station business in Cambodia. Yeah. For the special purpose vehicle or SPV, as my colleague Simon has mentioned in the first podcast, it will be not much different between the investing into the assembly plants or the charging station. So choosing the SPV, it's really depend largely on the tax efficiency, the regulatory environment, as well as the ease of doing business in Cambodia. So the popular jurisdiction that are often considered favorable for doing the business or being the holding company to invest in the charging station include Singapore, Hong Kong, Cayman Island, Luxembourg, and Ireland. And among all these jurisdictions, I would say that Singapore stands out the most in terms of the legal framework, political stability, favorable in terms of the tax regime, and as well as the existence of the double tax treaties in between Singapore and Cambodia. And as Diber had mentioned in the previous podcast, Hong Kong also stands out for the Chinese investor in relation to the SPV.
Thanks, Patna. And I understand another angle, and I'm sorry if this is coming out as a googly as in which you weren't really anticipating. I understand googly is a cricket term, so cricket game. So from an investor's perspective going into the country, one aspect which is equally important as that of a tax benefit or the ease of entering is the dispute redressal, right? And I believe Cambodia would recognize a foreign judgment, for instance, when there is a reciprocity. Similarly, Cambodia is a signatory to New York Convention as far as arbitration is concerned, and thus there is an ease of recognition and enforcement of arbitral award in the country. With that, idea in mind, I believe Cambodia does not have any reciprocity with any country.
Not with Singapore as yet, only with Vietnam.
Only with Vietnam.
Yes,
there is
correct.
only one country
Only
where
one.
there is a reciprocity. So with that in mind, what would your suggestion be from an investment perspective where the SPV should be?
In relation to the dispute mechanism, us as an advisor, we usually recommend the investor to opt for the arbitration mechanism, either in Cambodia or in Singapore because of the fast process. But there is no restriction on the commercial arrangement that the party need to choose which arbitration. It is really the party agreement on choosing which arbitration mechanism that they would feel that they have confidence with and easier for them if there is any dispute arise.
Certainly, and with the recent addition of Commercial Arbitration Center in Cambodia, NCAC.
NCAC.
I call it NCAC to make it a bit more. So NCAC, I believe there is a rising acceptability of alternative dispute resolution in the country. And I believe I'm equally on the same footing as you are, that for investment in the country, alternative dispute resolution, particularly because Cambodia is a signatory to New York Convention,
Correct.
is a better mechanism to have in your documentation. So thank you for that, Vatna. Very, very interesting to talk about this. And so with that, I will call upon Tiber about the much natural, question or inquisitivity which could arise in an investor's mind is the tax. So, what are the tax and customs incentives applicable for EV charging stations? And what are the key tax challenges that an investor of EV charging station need to consider before they're coming into the country?
Okay, thank you, Nishant. So actually, for the tax incentives, there's no specific provision under the investment law on touching upon charging stations. So it is not yet clear whether it could or it will not be covered by incentive. But the investment law provides some priority sectors related to green technology and those that could promote social economic development of Cambodia. So if those if the investment in the EV charging station would qualify under those, then it could possibly be granted a QIP incentive. So it depends. I mean, the tax incentive would depend on the category where it will qualify. So assuming it is subject to tax incentive, then it can be covered by tax on income exemption from 3 years to 9 years, and after the initial period of exemption, a gradual tax reduction for the next 6 years of ranging from 25% or 75% reduction. And in addition to the income tax exemption, there is also an exemption on minimum tax, prepayment tax on income, and for customs, there's no specific provision related to charging. The existing ones relate only to importation of assembly motor parts. So it's not yet clear how this would be considered. But assuming it is qualified as a QIP, then it can be covered by an exemption as well under the customs. I mean, if it's used for the production or related to the operations of the company. So that would really be dependent on whether they would qualify as a QIP or not. Now, with regard to challenges or the key considerations for tax for this type of sector, EV charging sector, the considerations would really depend on the type of the business model used by the company, by the site host, or by the EV service provider, because there are different models such as the uh, owner operator model, third party owner, or government driven approach. So for owner operator model, wherein the EV, the owner purchases the equipment from the service provider, then basically there is an arrangement that should be made with the service provider under an EPC arrangement. So for tax, the consideration there is on how to allocate or report the revenue of the owner, and at the same time the revenue of the service provider under the EPC arrangement.
Okay.
Now, if they are related parties, meaning they have connection or they are interrelated or the companies are affiliates, then there is also a consideration of transfer pricing.
Oh, yes.
In-
Yes,
in-
very important.
Yes, in Cambodia. Now, for third-party operator, wherein the owner is the one leasing the land to the service provider, then there is a consideration of lease. So similar, the how much is the rental income, related party transactions. Those should be considered. And for tax for any payment of land, for land rental, it is generally not subject to withholding tax if they are paid to a VAT registered company with as long as there's a VAT supporting invoice. Now, if they are paid to an individual, then there's a 10% withholding tax to be withheld by the owner. Now, another consideration for this arrangement is the payment of immovable property tax, especially for the owner, and for government-driven approach for these kinds of model, the tax implication on any financial subsidy, any concessional land arrangement, and government grant should also be considered. Now, for EV charging, one of the key challenge for now is whether this would be considered as a sale of electricity.
Good
Because
point.
it is not yet clear whether the sale is considered a sale of electricity. For tax, if it's considered a sale of electricity, it can be exempted from VAT. But if it's not considered a sale of electricity, then it could be subject to 10%. So I think further guidance from the GDT would be needed in order to address these types of peculiarities.
That's very interesting, Diver, particularly when you talk about the sale of electricity. I mean, whether it will be considered as a sale of electricity, exempting it from the VAT, or whether it'll be considered as sale of a commodity, generally speaking, where VAT may apply. Good to know, and you've touched upon some very interesting aspects from a tax perspective. It sets the tone of me to go to our industry experts who have been patiently sitting here in this episode to put their point of view. So first, I would go to Andy, particularly also because Andy's entity has a couple of charging stations. So he has the practicality of how things have been happening. But Andy, my question to you is, what is the status of charging infrastructure for EVs in Cambodia? How does this impact the market growth, particularly as a sector, EV as a sector? And what efforts are being made by commercial entities to expand charging station networks across the country?
Charging and battery infrastructure investment for the electric vehicle in Cambodia is kind of the controversial debate issue, kind of chicken egg issue.
Sorry, okay.
So yes, in case of the investor, based on the market demand growing, they will more invest for battery infrastructure or charging infrastructure. But in case of the users, once they have enough the battery, the charging infrastructure, I will buy the electric vehicle. So it's very difficult.
I can understand.
But my personal idea, public and private sectors, the firstly invested battery charging infrastructure first for the user. Otherwise, we cannot make it market. So let's divide it, the electric car, 4-wheeler and 2 and 3-wheelers. In case of 4-wheelers, as I remember, 2022, the UNDP started the demonstration project, the battery car, the charging infrastructure at the MPWT building.
Yes.
So as I remember, that is the first the fast charger. And at first, they installed the slow charger, AC charger. But after that, they also expanded the fast charger. Yes, at the time, only the public sector, such as the UNDP or the international organization, is supported Cambodia's electric.
There was a report also, I believe.
Yes, but this day, there is more the private player, such as the BYD, Hyundai, the Jaguar, and BMW. They also start to sell the electric car in Cambodia, and they also start to install by themselves for their users for electric car chargers around the showrooms and the customer, the houses and or residents. And also another the Chinese the electric car makers such as the iCar, Ion, they also provide these slow chargers to the customer, right? And also the others the private sector players such as the PTT and Total Energy, the gas station. Also, they are also interesting to expand it to the fossil the business to the electric the business. So they also start to install at the gas station.
Okay, that's very interesting.
And the other side for the two-wheeler and three-wheelers in Cambodia, as I remember from 2020, the OICA, the first based on the battery swapping the model, they start to providing the small scale of the battery swapping station. And 2022, all of the three-wheeler tuk-tuk, the Onion, they also start to the business. And also the 2023, the Verywords start to invest in the battery infrastructure.
Okay.
So as like that, I think the personal private sector players have to invest it the first for the charging and battery infrastructure to make it their own targeting market. So in case of the Verywords, now we have the 7 charging station, Phnom Penh and Siem Reap, and we are now under the partnership with Uri Bank. And through the Uri Bank, their bank networks, with their ATM machines, we start to install the charging station. And we are planning to, by end of October 2024, planning to install the 20 location. And by the 2025 June, 100 location, the Phnom Penh and Siem Reap and road number 6. So that is our planning, but also there is some budget, business budget issue at private sector. So yes, I'm totally agree to invest in advanced the people, the users, users the market demands. The private sector players have to invest by themselves, but charging infrastructure investment, the budget and cost is huge. So they cannot do it by private sector by itself. So that is the problem. So all stakeholders need to make a support together. For in case of the Verywords, actually we have the different business model with other private sector player, because we connected this e-mobility project with the ITMO, the carbon credit trading mechanisms with Korea and Cambodia government. So that's why we recently make a contract with the Korea governments to invest the battery infrastructure in Cambodia, 100 location with connecting with the carbon credit project. So that's why we can install the 100 location charging station by ourselves. As like that, private sectors by itself is hard to invest it by their own budget. As like our business model, some kind of public sectors. In case of us, to Korea, the governments or the Korea public sector, such as Korea Energy Agency and KOICA and Ministry of Industry in Korea, they support the project and support it to battery infrastructure install. So as like that, it's important for the partnership.
I understand. Yeah, that's correct. And in fact, you rightly said how UNDP was involved, because there was a roadmap for development of charging stations. A report was published in 2023, if I'm not wrong. And I believe there is a lot of room for the DFIs who are looking at more sustainable business financing to come and play that role. And I believe one angle you can see is how ADB has financed several solar projects in the country, power projects. So these could play out in those components, which they would know better. But still, there is a role for DFIs to play, as you quite rightly pointed out. There is a role for governments to play to bring this into a reality because the cost involved, and again, as you coined it, chicken or the egg story is all that together. And this sets the tone to uh, uh, reach out to Cécile. And particularly, Cécile, you, I believe, have worked on policy regarding charging station. And I would, it would be very interesting to know from you the insight, basically, the key takeaways that you have proposed, and how does it impact the business in Cambodia. Please give some emphasis on what did you really propose in your report on safety angle and location of charging stations. So over to you.
Thanks, Nishant, and thanks, Andy, for the concrete example that you gave. So yeah, that roadmap that was mentioned previously, we worked under the support of UNDP to develop it back in 2022. What was interesting in that work was actually that very early on in the process of EV development, the government understood the importance of the EV charging station. And that's one of the first topics that started to be addressed through the technical working group that was led at that time by MPWT. Now he has changed, but by that time it was MPWT. And so that exercise was actually conducted in parallel to the work that was conducted by World Bank, which was more on the development of EV vehicles and the adoption of EV vehicles. And so in parallel, you had the work on the charging station. So just to set the stage, I'll give a few numbers, which are important to have in mind. So the demand for power to support the EV charging station in Cambodia is really expected to rise, starting in 2030 at 130 gigawatt hour per year. We would move by 2040 at 1,200 gigawatt hour per year, and up to 8,000 gigawatt hour per year by 2050. So that really represents an exponential growth starting 2040 to 2050. So that means that you really need to have strategic planning and investment to support this growth. So in the recommendation that we provided, we separated the charging infrastructure by typologies, because you actually have 5 different typologies of charging infrastructure, and all of them have their set of characteristics and specificities. So the first one is home charging. Home charging really represents the majority of the charging. It's usually we talk and we see around the world, it's 80% of the charging that happens, both for car and for 2- and 3-wheelers. So these are mostly with low power chargers at home or workplace. And for those, we recommended to keep regulation pretty light and pushing for EV-ready construction in new buildings, especially in shared residence, in borei, in offices. Of course, with this needs to come the high safety standards for both the components and the installation. In terms of business model, it will be mainly self-investment by vehicle owners for single houses, or you could also have third-party owner-operator models when you are in shared residence and offices. So that was the first one. The second one are in public locations, so like streets, parking lots, government buildings, schools, as you was mentioning. For this, we really recommended to keep a transparent tender process so that private company can invest it and manage those charging stations under concessional lease agreements. This could be done under PPP, where private company would be handling the investment, installation, and operation, while the public sector would provide lands and regulatory support. Here, in terms of numbers, it's not that important, but to give the tone, it's quite important to have the public sector leading the way. Then you have this charging away from home, and under this you have 2 types. The urban AC, so slower charging, So for urban AC charging away from home, like in coffee shops, malls, hotels, touristic sites. For here, we recommended minimal regulation for low power AC chargers, really to encourage private businesses to install chargers just as amenities or on a fee basis. Setting national and provincial targets and providing soft incentives such as tax benefit could help motivate businesses to integrate EV charging into their urban operation. For this, in terms of business model, so for smaller sites, it would be private investment directly, and you can already see it in Phnom Penh. You have a few coffee shops that have invested in slow charging facilities, and for larger location, usually it's third-party owner-operator models that are adopted, such as in hotels. I think you have some already, for example, in the Sofitel. Now moving to what will really be the key of the adoption of four-wheeler vehicles, EV four-wheeler vehicles, it's really the DC fast chargers. Why those? Because the main fear that end users have is really the range anxiety. If I use my car, am I going to be able to reach the neighboring city? And if I don't have enough charge, how will I be able to charge on the way? And so those fast chargers are really essential for long distance travel and for the uptake of four-wheelers. For those, you need a little bit of mix in terms of strategic rollout of these high power stations along key national roads and express roadways. So what we recommended as a first was to focus on the major roads like National Road 4, 5, 6, and 7, starting with the 6 as you were mentioning. Of course, a little bit on the 1, 2, 3, as these are
Heavy
long distance and more heavy traffic. Clear regulation should be in place with targets to install up to 100 fast chargers by 2030 and expanding up to 6,000 at least by 2050. As was mentioned previously, for this DC fast charger, that will be the key to trigger EV four-wheeler uptake. You need to clarify a few things, such as how charge point operators are going to be able to use the electricity law to establish charging station. This was one of the first recommendations. Unfortunately, because we were working with MPWT, we were not able to touch on that specific point, but this one will be key. Currently, what is planned is to work under the current subcontract license, where it provides a 10% return on investment. But there are a lot of questions around this subcontract license that already exist to see how cost base for CPOs would be calculated and how those CPOs would be able to set the tariff in a way that it would cover costs and provide a reasonable return on investment. In addition to this, we recommended some early incentives such as subsidies or viability gap funding, which would be crucial to kickstart deployment of these fast chargers, especially in underserved areas. It will be very difficult to have private sector investing on the roads going to Mondulkiri, for example, because you would have much lower traffic, but you do need to be able to cover those areas. In addition, you need to ensure, of course, safety standard and transparent cost structures are maintained. Business model for this, owner-operator model, possibly through PPPs, or collaboration with gas station operators, as you were mentioning. A lot of them have demonstrated interest into moving into this and are just waiting for a clarification in that subcontract license, especially as they would be invested in multiple areas in the country. Right now, with the subcontract license, you need to negotiate in each of those areas. Last charging infrastructure type is the one that Andy promotes, which is battery swapping. This, we do believe that it will be mainly for logistic companies, fleets, shared mobility services, and it's really, really important to have a clear guideline as to how this battery swapping is going to develop so that investments can happen. It's crucial to set high safety standards for component quality and installation, and to support the development of recycling channel for used battery packs. And I think you are leading the way with what you're doing with Verywords. Now, these were recommendations specific for charging infrastructure. I'll just give more general infrastructure recommendation, such as develop vehicle battery disposal plan to ensure safe disposal of EV batteries alongside other hazardous waste like lithium. Establish partnership with regional recycling partners as the market develops, so what you're already starting with Korea. Conduct safety assessment for AC charging. This is absolutely key, and we'll touch upon that topic a little bit later, but there are some real questions in terms of the home and office capacity to host electrical housing to ensure safe home charging. This is critical to avoid fire risk at home location. Prioritize the safety and interoperability of the national EV charging network. This is really something that has been seen in other countries. If you don't work on the interoperability, it can become a nightmare for users because they'll have to use different charging method, different payment method, depending on who is proposing. And this creates a significant barrier for user to start using their vehicle. One key point is how infrastructure upgrades for site host is going to happen. Because in most locations right now in Cambodia, at the site, they don't have the sufficient infrastructure to supply electricity for charging station. So who will bear the costs and who will come with the design? This is going to be an interesting discussion with EDC mainly. And then absolutely necessary if we want to have intelligent EVs, it needs to be grouped with renewable energy because otherwise it just doesn't make sense to have carbon intensive power production supplying electricity to EVs. So in addition to this, of course, as we discussed previously, we need to focus on HR skills. We need to focus on collaboration between the private sector and the government so that the regulation that comes in place actually support the private sector that has been waited for a couple of years. They are on the starting block and they just wait to have a clearer picture in terms of what they can do to start investing. Also fostering discussion between banking sector, development agencies and the private sector. And that's typically, and I think that's why we were involved in that work, that's typically what we started doing quite earlier on in the EV development process.
I mean, I guess you covered it 360, almost everything necessary to know in your report, and few critical aspects which are my takeaway, and I have a follow-up question, particularly to you both, Andy and Cécile. First is you talk about the tariffs, which is important from a consumer's perspective, and what you coined as to the standard of tariff would be cost plus reasonable return on investment. Now, these costs can be well ascertained in absolutes. The reasonable return of investments, it depends, right? It factors cost of financing, it factors many other things around it, and market standards of what is considered reasonable. So I would like to call upon you both. First, Cécile, as to what did you actually advocate for when you talked about reasonable return on investments. And Andy, on you as to how are you pricing it? Like, what are the criteria you're looking at? And I believe there is no market standards on this at present. So, are there other players, Andy, which you know of, and how close or far they are from your tariff pricing standards? So, over to you, Cecile, first, and then Andy, you may come in.
I think initially what we advocated is what is being seen in other countries, and especially in Southeast Asia, is to have a specific regulation for EV charging station and a pricing that is calculated based on location, based on traffic, etc. Now, what is most probably going to happen, because this is what has been discussed with MME and EAC, is that it will start under the current electricity law, which means that it will have to fit with the current practices under this law, which is this cost and this reasonable calculation of reasonable return, which is for now based on 10%.
10%. That's right.
So there are a lot of questions of how will the cost base be calculated, and how really this if the tariffs are going to be mandated, because for now this is the situation for other businesses. So a lot of question marks, and I imagine seeing how other sectors are being developed in Cambodia, it will be a trial and error. It will start like this, and then it will come back. They'll try something else, and this is how things happen in Cambodia. Private sector leads, learnings, and then regulation follows.
And actually, Cecile, if you look at it, a template from a country cannot be simply uprooted and be fit-all template. So a country has to go through a trial and error process. And you're right. I mean, that needs to be seen as the sector is very new. And so very quickly, Andy, to you on how are you factoring your battery swap model pricing, and how different or close it is with your competitors?
Actually, the business model is different with other private sector players, because our project is finally connected with the carbon credit. So that's why we hope to provide is more reasonable and affordable price range for the Cambodian user. So that's why it's different. So I'm sorry that I cannot mention about other players, how about the marketing and targeting the price issues. But only for us, we only provide is the final goal is to getting the carbon credit for contributed Cambodia and Korea governments the carbon neutrality goal. So that's why we hope to the massive providing to the Cambodian market. So that's why the price is policy is different. But from 2022, we start to providing the mobility service to the Siem, because before opening our assembly factory, we needed to checking and monitoring about Cambodians, the users, the drivers, the habit, and about the tracking record. So 2022, we providing around 10 units of scooter to the Cambodian user at the Siem. We divided group, such as the food deliveries, some kind of public officers, some kind of the student. So we make it some of the different groups, but mainly we focus for the delivery market rider, because they are heavy user.
Correct. The logistics.
Yes. So as I remember, we providing 2 or 3 units for the Food Panda delivery rider and Wingmore riders. So before we providing our electric scooter to the delivery market riders, they said the daily day drive is more than 100 kilometers.
Every day.
Per daily.
Wow. Okay.
And the monthly they paid gasoline charge over $100. And some of them is more than over the 150. So we provided some of the testing scooter to the delivery riders with new scooter and unlimited battery service, $50. So the monthly, with the $50, they get the new electric scooter and unlimited the battery swapping service. So just simply the compares with gasoline scooters, only the operating cost, the pure charge, they decrease is more than 50%. In addition to it, they get the new scooter. So they really like it, and they also inform to the Phnom Penh riders. So after that, we also start to providing the Phnom Penh riders. So as like that, to compare with operating costs, as like based on the heavy riders, so they can based on the monthly can save it more than 50%.
Understood.
But in case of the light users, some kind of middle school, high school, the university, they only drive the 5 or 10 kilo per day. So our business, the marketing planning is we have the different monthly subscription model. So in case of the heavy rider, as like the delivery market rider or some kind of marketing and sales person from the financial, the bank, insurance, the company, we will provide is unlimited the batteries, the charging service around under the $50. I think we are planning to $48. But for those light user and middle user around $30, $20, $10, or the single, hope the single the change users, we will make it $1 or $2 the single the payment swapping charge. So as like that, we planning to make it some kind of reasonable and affordable price range for the Cambodia user.
Thanks a lot, Andy, on that. And one important point which you touched upon, which actually chimes into what I will ask Simon to come in for, was standardization of the charging point. We don't want to come through that era when we had different mobile adapters which we had to charge, have to have a socket. Anyways, thanks a lot for that, Cécile and Andy. Very interesting to discuss the market aspects of the business. And with that, Simon, let me please come to you. And probably my question to you would be, what technical standards must, I emphasize must, EV charging stations meet? How are safety and quality standards enforced for EV charging infrastructure in the country and in the present region?
If you'll forgive me, I shall answer that question. I might ask you a question, Andy. I understand there are 3 global standards, or Cécile indeed. You've got a European American one, a Japanese one, Chinese one. You've got all 3 of those kinds of vehicles on the road here in Cambodia. Famously, the British ambassador bought the first Jaguar over. Which one's going to win out? You'll remember, I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember the PAL NTSC connection problem with the first place, probably not. Which one is going to win out?
Market sharing winners win the take it all the market.
Say again, sorry?
So market the winners. I think the US or European, the standard will be the take it, the standard.
So winner takes it all.
Because each of the different person have a different point of view. So, but when we the recalls about when we the VHS, the video, the type, at the time actually the Sony, the technology is more higher than the VHS, but actually the standard follow the VHS, and also mobile phone charger also the same. iPhone have the more the market shares, but Android and Type C they have the more the market shares than whole the world, Europe and the Korea and Japan and US. So that's why now the change is the sheet type charger. So that's why it's important. So maybe the one players to make a market share and dominance this one.
Interesting. Yeah.
Over to you, Simon, again on the question. Which
Interesting. So to answer your question, there are no specific standards applicable to EV charging stations at the moment. In the roadmap that Cécile's company had a major hand in drafting, 8 I think were identified as being 8 current ISC standards, Institute standards of Cambodia. I think I have that initialization correct. That identified 8 existing standards that could apply to e-mobility at the moment, but none are specific to EV charging stations at the moment. But that's recognized by the MPWT. And so it's recognized as a regulatory gap, and one that needs to be filled. And so I think we can take encouragement from that. But certainly, and then of course you have the ISC. How are they going to test it? What will the standards do? And they have to be, they have to evolve as well. They can't, as the technology evolves, they can't be static standards. They have to, and so the ISC will currently be that will be the entity to enforce them. So it's a developing space, evidently, and so we watch this space. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Simon, about that battery standardization and the safety, the guidelines about, as you know, the Cambodia government doesn't have the enough power and budget and human resources. So that's why, as I understand it, some of the other country, they're planning to implementing the ODA project to make it the EV, the standardizations, battery standardization and safety guideline and the safety, the standard. So as I, also the Korea also governments also trying to suggest it, the ODA project to the setting up the EV, the battery, the safety standard or the EV, electric car standard as like that. So I think also the other country are the same, other the European, the US or even the China's, they hope to some kind of the policy, the consulting or the supporting to Cambodia governments because of they hope to the lead market.
Yeah, wonderful insight. Thank you.
So it's a fertile ground for many investors to come and pioneer it, and I believe the one who takes the lead in a larger manner would have the market share to an extent. And thanks for that, Simon. And in fact, what I hear from you is it's a developing area as far as regulation is concerned. And I believe Cécile actually talked about that at length as to how her report had emphasized upon certain key components. But one aspect of that, Vatna, would be, and if there is something existing, I'm sure it will be difficult to ascertain, particularly from an EV charging station perspective. But if there would be certain criteria, like from safety perspective or otherwise, on the zoning regulations as to where, what are the basic regulations where a charging station could be set up, right? And are there any restrictions on those locations where, okay, you can't really have a high voltage charging station within X kilometer, X 100 meters of such an establishment, and so on and so forth. So do you have some insights in that?
Yes, my answer to the two questions will be none at this stage.
Okay.
So there is no regulate the zoning area for the EV charging station, and there's no restriction on the location where the EV charging station can be set up as yet. However, this is also one of the government plan in the national EV policy, that the government will determine the location and the number of the charging station, the swap station, based on the actual need to ensure the safety and the profitable investment. So they aim to finalize it in by 2025 in the national policy. Mm-hmm. And thank you, Cécile, for your detailed report. I think most of it has been taken by the government and has been included in the national policy, because based on my reading of the national policy, I can see that the government will prepare the regulation and standard for the charging station, the charging equipment, to ensure the safety of the use of the charging station. They will also set some type of technology, including establishing the mobile app to track the payment and to track the number of the charging station as well. Mm-hmm. And they will also implement an easy process to facilitate the approval and the license for the service provider who will provide the electricity for the charging station. It is in their plan by 2025.
Good to know what, and kudos to you, Cécile. I mean, if they have been implemented in the national policy, congratulations on that. The basic understanding here is that charging station as a business is more of a developing area, which to my mind is a good thing because it brings about that opportunity for the stakeholders to work with the government in order for the government to implement the best standards, but in a unified and a standardized manner. So I take away the requirements of zoning regulations as to where charging stations have to be. I take away the recommendations which you have made with respect to, say, the tariffs, the standardizations, the safety aspects of the charging stations. And I understand, Andy, you talked about how your model in general is not the standard which probably the private players will follow as far as tariffs are concerned.
Yes, they will follow the
I'm sure.
At least it take more than 3 years.
I'm sure.
If they start now.
I'm sure. But all in all, it does advocate the growing market and its requirements. With that, we will come to a halt of the present episode, and we'll meet you again in the third episode, which will be about the downstream, that is the showrooms. So with that, thank you everybody for joining this interesting discussion. I learned a lot myself. Thank you so much.